here today and talk to you guys about the work we do and all about OpenStreetMap generally. And I'll pass it to Jake to introduce himself before we get started.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. Happy to be here.
Alrighty, let's get going. So, if I could get maybe a show of raised hand emojis or thumbs up if you are familiar with OpenStreetMap in any way. You've heard about it, you've used it in your work. Okay, we've got a couple. Ooh, we're getting a number of hand raises. Wonderful. All right. If you didn't raise your hand, if you're unfamiliar, OpenStreetMap is a global project to create a free and editable geographic database of the world. And it is entirely volunteer run and volunteer driven. It is an incredibly active project. You could see yesterday, just over 6,700 contributors made over 49,000 map edits. And that's happening in countries all over the world. The map and the database is constantly being updated. OpenStreetMap as a project started in 2004. The domain was registered by Steve Coast in the United Kingdom. At the time, all of the geographic survey data done by the UK government was all copyright under the Crown, and it wasn't publicly available. So that is what OpenStreetMap was responding to. And the image you could see on this slide here is the very first editing party in 2005. And I love the pages on the wall that say free map. That's what it's all about. You can see here the very first OpenStreetMap homepage. Steve posted woo in August of 2004 when they got the website up. And shortly after that time, in September of 2005, this is what OpenStreetMap.org looked like. So this is an area in London, I believe, of what the first editing applet, looked like at the time. Today, this is the same area if you go to OpenStreetMap.org. As you can see, it looks more like a map and it's much more complete. And there is a lot more data in there than there was back in 2005. If you have never heard of OpenStreetMap, if you don't think you have interacted with OpenStreetMap at all, I can assure you that that is likely incorrect. OpenStreetMap is used as a base map in many, many different applications. If, for example, you are reading a news article and they are describing, maybe this is the New York Times or the Washington Post, they're describing a conflict and they have a map showing you of what's going on. Chances are that's with OpenStreetMap data. You will see it everywhere, even if you're not aware that that's the case. And of course, we're with OpenStreetMap US. We talk about OpenStreetMap all the time and the power of crowdsourced geographic data. But a lot of folks ask us, why would I trust OpenStreetMap? People relate the project to Wikipedia, the free editable encyclopedia, and say, if anybody can edit the map, why should I trust the data? And we often respond with the fact that you already are, but massive corporations and government entities and nonprofits across the world already are as well. For example, when you call an Uber to come pick you up, that Uber driver is navigating with OpenStreetMap data. So we just wanted to pull some information about the OpenStreetMap community in the Alabama area. We pulled this instance from the area around Birmingham specifically. You could see all the little active mappers in the Birmingham area. They're color-coded based on how many edits they have made to the map. And they are just a small part of the over 1,000 mappers that were active in the United States yesterday. So you've got mapping neighbors in your midst, even if you weren't aware. And when you go to OpenStreetMap.org, which is one of the primary ways folks editing and contributing to OpenStreetMap interact with the data set, this is what you'll see for Alabama. It is defined as a relation in OpenStreetMap, which is something Jake will touch on in a little bit. But you can see all the metadata attached to the state. This is just a selection. I didn't include it here, but they also have, the name for Alabama in many, many different languages across the world. And if you zoom in, for example, on a building like the Alabama State Capitol, this is what you'll see. You could see the metadata attached to the kind of zoomed in image of the state capitol. We call those the tags that are assigned to this feature in OpenStreetMap. But you could also see the version of the feature. For example, this is the 6th edition of the Alabama State Capitol building. You could see when it was edited and by who. So it was edited over 1 year ago by the user Matthews, who's very active all across the United States. And every update to OpenStreetMap is assigned a unique change set ID, and you can see that ID here as well. And if you look at a trail, a park, a grocery store in OpenStreetMap, you could see similar information as well. As I mentioned, all of this data is volunteer contributed, and everybody has their own reason for getting involved with the OSM project. For example, maybe somebody lives in an area of the world where the primary maps out there, Google Maps, Apple Maps, maybe isn't very complete in their area, and they're looking for a better source of of data to navigate from in their area. Maybe they have a niche interest, like somebody is really interested in mapping mountain bike trails. It's pretty hard to find mountain bike trails on Google Maps. That's not really something Google is very interested in adding to their map, but anybody could add whatever they like on OSM. So there's a large community of mountain bikers who are keeping the trails in their areas updated. And of course, there are folks who get into OpenStreetMap because they are generally invested in the idea of open source software and open source data. All right, so when we're talking about OpenStreetMap, it could get a little in the weeds, but it's very important to understand the license behind OpenStreetMap because that is what protects all of these volunteer contributions. So the license behind OpenStreetMap is called the Open Database License, and it was created specific for the OpenStreetMap project. Essentially, what that means is that if you use OSM data, you have to give credit to OpenStreetMap and its contributors. You can see down at the bottom the little copyright OpenStreetMap contributors with the heart. You'll see that on practically any map that uses OpenStreetMap data. And share alike, which means that when you make OpenStreetMap data available to others, you have to continue to license it under the ODBL as well. But of course, and I hope you could see just a little bit, that OpenStreetMap is much more than just the data behind it and just the base map that you see on OpenStreetMap.org. For example, it is a global technical ecosystem and unified data schema. There's not that many databases out there where you can see roads in Richmond, Virginia, and roads in Germany, and you could understand both of them as a road, and they're tagged similarly, they're mapped similarly, and that language is shared across the world. And of course, it's an avenue for citizen engagement as our world is becoming increasingly digital, more things are online. People have found it very empowering to put the power of the map in their hands, as we like to say. All right, and I'm going to pass it off to Jake now to talk a little bit more about the technical infrastructure of OpenStreetMap.
Thanks. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how OpenStreetMap data is organized at a technical level, and also what tools exist in the ecosystem for contributing data to OpenStreetMap, interacting with the data, understanding it, exporting it, and processing it in different workflows. But first, the thing I want to make clear, if it isn't already, is that OpenStreetMap is more than just streets. Excuse me. OpenStreetMap attempts to model everything that physically exists in the world, pretty much. So OpenStreetMap has ways to describe buildings, businesses that operate inside of those buildings, sidewalk infrastructure, bike lanes, crosswalks, all that kind of thing, transit routes for buses, trains, all types of public transit, natural features, woodlands, mountains, and we represent all of that, kind of the richness and complexity of the physical world with a very flexible data model. So if you go to the next slide, please. OpenStreetMap has three fundamental data types that exist in the database. They're called nodes, ways, and relations. And they are, if you've interacted with geospatial data, I'm sure you're like kind of used to a world of points, lines, and polygons. And this is similar, but not the same as that. And I'll get into the details a little bit. But these three fundamental data types are used by the OpenStreetMap community that's producing the data to model everything that we want to model about the physical world. So nodes, first of all, if you go to the next slide, please, Alyssa. Sorry. Nodes represent individual points. So they have a latitude, longitude coordinate. They represent a physical place on the map. Ways, on the next slide, represent lines or areas. And ways are sequences of nodes that are strung together. And then finally, relations are elements that group other elements together to describe some relationship between them. And each of these three fundamental data types will have a unique ID in the OpenStreetMap data set. If you go to the next slide, sorry, forgetting. So we can refer to a specific node or a specific way or a specific relation with its ID. And then if you go to the next slide, the thing that gives these very general purpose elements their meaning is tags. Tags are key value pairs that can be attached to any element, a node, a way, or a relation. And the tag is what assigns some meaning to that object. And you can add multiple tags to an element. So if you go to the next slide, I'll show an example. If you just draw a line on the map, you create a way in OpenStreetMap. It's not obvious yet, what does that line mean? Is it a road? Is it a river? Is it a sidewalk? Is it an administrative boundary? So the tags clarify what the meaning of that line is. And for a street, you would have tags like highway equals residential, so that the tags are key value pairs. Highway is the key. That tells you that this is some type of roadway. Highway is a British English term that we get because the project started in the UK. And residential is a specific category of highway, a surface street with houses along it. And then you can have other properties that are tags like name equals Union Street. That's the name of the road, obviously. And max speed is the maximum speed limit there. And if you advance to the next slide, something to point out about these is that although keys and values of tags are just strings, they are, in practice, there are kind of a few different types. So highway is a tag that behaves like an enum, where there's a small set of well-known values that are expected. Residential road, primary road, secondary road, things like that. Name is free-form text. So whoever adds the data to the database, they can put whatever they want there. And max speed is a number, that number has implicit units. So you could say 30 mph explicitly, or if you don't say anything, the default interpretation is kilometers per hour. These tags can be combined in lots of ways to describe kind of all different aspects of all different types of objects that we find in the physical world. If you go to the next slide. And there's a few different patterns that we use for kind of organizing that chaos and making it a little bit more intuitive and more clear what different tags mean and how they relate to each other. And the first common convention is refinement, where you want to, like, OpenStreetMap lets you be very general about something if you don't know that much about the feature, or you can go into a lot of detail. You can add tags about, kind of minute trivia about the object if you know it. And OpenStreetMap welcomes that kind of rich data when it's available. but it permits for a lower resolution representation too. So refinement is a common pattern for that, and refinement is where you take a value of a tag and then you kind of reuse it as a key for another tag to say something more specific about the thing. So amenity equals parking is a tag that says that this is a place where you can park a car. But there's a lot of different types of parking. There's underground garages and parking structures and street side parking. So if you want to say what kind specifically this parking area is, you can say parking equals surface. You take the value of the amenity equals parking tag and you reuse it as a key to say something kind of to elaborate on what you've been saying in the first tag. Similarly with building equals office, that tells you that this building is an office building. But if you want to get specific and say what type of office it is, you can say office equals government. Now that tells you it's a government office. On the next slide, please. The next convention that I'll talk about briefly is key prefixes and suffixes. So the key part of the tag, it's pretty common to use these prefixes or suffixes that are separated from the rest of the tag by a colon. And that helps us kind of organize and group tags together. So one use case for that is, as Alyssa mentioned, OpenStreetMap supports many languages. So things can have multiple names in different languages. So we use a colon with an ISO language code suffix to differentiate which language we're talking about when we say like what the name of something is. The OpenStreetMap has address points, and we group those all. They're all like each part of the address goes in a different tag: the house number, the street, the city, the zip code. But we group them all under this adder colon prefix: adder colon city, adder colon postcode. So they're all kind of like easy to spot and notionally grouped together. And then finally, sometimes the key prefix just hints at what kind of object this tag tends to belong on. So building colon levels equals 14 makes it really clear that that property is something that belongs on a building object. And it's telling you how many floors the building has. And it's, it doesn't make sense on a fence or an airport or a field. Let's see, I think next slide, please. The last convention that I want to talk about is multiple values. So there's a lot of places in OpenStreetMap where something is describing a category and not everything fits into one category. So the cuisine of a restaurant or the surface of a road or a field or a public square. If there's more than one value that's appropriate to describe that, you can separate those values with a semicolon to include multiple. Next slide, please. So this model of tagging things and kind of letting the producers of the data, the mappers, mix and match tags to describe all of the different aspects of the physical objects that they're creating in the database. It lets people create really rich data that has lots of detail about the physical world. So in this little video you're seeing on OpenStreetMap.org, you can click on things, you can query them and see, what tags are attached to each feature that you see on the map. And here's the Virginia State Capitol building. I think if you go to the next slide, it'll stop looping. Oh no, that's okay. Yeah, the tags let you describe all sorts of physical details. So on that previous slide, I don't know, it may have been hard to see, but the Virginia State Capitol building has physical information about the building and what it's made of and its roof shape. It has information about like what services reside there and how to contact them, the phone number, the website. It has IDs of that object in other data sets like the GNIS data set or Wikidata. So all of that information is like available, and you can attach those facts to any object in the database by putting a tag on it. And the tags that exist are created by the community. Like people are putting data into OpenStreetMap every day, and they're coming across new circumstances, new types of physical features, or new situations that they've never encountered before. And the community will come together and discuss what's the best way to tag that. Like how should we model this fact or set of facts about the world? And then all of that knowledge gets documented on the wiki, which is this big reference manual that, like OpenStreetMap, anyone can contribute to. And it talks about how to, what do different tags mean? It's really useful if you're producing data to say, what's the right way to describe this so that other people will be able to interpret it. And then it's also really useful if you're consuming OpenStreetMap data so that you can go look up, like, what does this tag mean that I'm seeing? And how should I interpret it? Next slide, please. So because there's all of this data, this rich data, kind of multifaceted data in OpenStreetMap, it's useful for lots of different purposes, and it ends up in lots of different places. So you may have seen OpenStreetMap data if you have used Esri base maps or feature layers or base maps in ArcGIS, or if you've ever seen a map that is using Mapbox hosted map services. OpenStreetMap data also gets kind of remixed into other data sets and republished. So Overture Maps and ArcGIS Living Atlas are both data sets that are based largely on OpenStreetMap data. And then, of course, as Alyssa already talked about, there are lots of consumer-facing applications and services that are based on OpenStreetMap data. Uber and Lyft apps are using OpenStreetMap to show you a map of where drivers are. Outdoor navigation apps like AllTrails, Strava, Gaia GPS are using OpenStreetMap data. And also, even if you don't see a map as the user of a service, there might be map data under the hood that comes from OpenStreetMap. Like if you order a package online, chances are that some part of that package's journey to you on a delivery vehicle is depending on OpenStreetMap data to route correctly. Next slide, please. So I'll talk briefly now about kind of what tools exist to contribute data and how people are interacting with the data and contributing to the map. So people edit OpenStreetMap in lots of different ways. Because it's a volunteer-driven project, lots of people are doing this for fun, and they build, people have built tools that make it easy to do different types of mapping or different workflows that they find fun and interesting to them. So you can edit OpenStreetMap directly on openstreetmap.org. You can go there, you can sign in or create an account, and then there's an edit button in the top bar, and you can click that, and it will launch a browser-based editor that lets you edit anything on the map. But there's also specialized tools that also run in your browser on other websites that let you do specific types of mapping. So there are tasking managers that are really popular, especially for like mapping lots of missing data. If like the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team uses this for mapping buildings after a natural disaster to provide emergency responders on the ground with better information about where people may be who need assistance. Tools like Map Roulette and Map Complete kind of simplify and gamify the process of contributing, making it really easy to kind of click through a whole bunch of tasks quickly and review contributions. There's also a desktop application called Josm that you can install on your computer that is very powerful and useful for complicated editing. It can handle a lot of data. It's scriptable. Next slide, please. There's also tools for editing OpenStreetMap on your phone when you're out and about. So there's GoMap and Vespucci are apps that are kind of full-featured OpenStreetMap editors that you can use on your mobile phone. And there are also specialized editors for kind of specifically for adding things like POIs, like when is this coffee shop open, or is this grocery store wheelchair accessible? And Street Complete and Everydoor are two examples of apps like that. And then finally, Field Papers is an app, is a tool that you can use on your computer to print out a paper map and take that out into the field, mark it up with pencil and pen, and then scan it, and you can use that back at home as a reference layer to edit and improve OpenStreetMap. And Mapillary is a crowdsourced street-level imagery data set that you can use to improve OpenStreetMap. So think like Google Street View, but collected by volunteers. Next slide, please. As you can imagine, because anyone can edit OpenStreetMap, we also have to think about how to keep the data correct and high quality. So there's a couple of tools for monitoring changes that happen to OpenStreetMap so that reviewers can spot mistakes or vandalism and correct those things quickly. OSM CHA is one of the principal tools for that. It lets you view edits that are happening to OpenStreetMap and review them and revert them if they, if there's a problem. Map Roulette, which is a tool for kind of rapidly adding and fixing things on the map, also has a review workflow built into it. Tasking Manager does as well. So there's the option to have kind of a second set of eyes on any edit. And then there's also, because it's open data, there's lots of ways to access the raw data directly, and people can and have built QA workflows on top of those tools. Next slide, please. And then how to use the data. There's infinite ways to use OpenStreetMap data because it's free and open and available in lots of formats. But just as a couple of examples, you can use OpenStreetMap data in QGIS or ArcGIS. You could download the OpenStreetMap planet file, or you can download it in a variety of other formats like GeoJSON or GeoParquet. You can query and filter out, just data for a particular region or of a particular type that's relevant for your use case, and you can load that into a GIS workbench and do all sorts of workflows based on that. You can also build web maps with OpenStreetMap data. So if you use Mapbox to make web maps that display in a web browser or on a mobile app, they're using OpenStreetMap data. You can also build your own web maps kind of from scratch and host them yourself using tools like MapLibre. Next slide, please. And I think now I'm going to pass it back to Alyssa to talk about how this is all organized.
Yeah, so Jake touched on this a bit, talking about the wiki, how folks are figuring out what tags we use to tag things in OpenStreetMap. Also talking about different ways you can edit the map. But of course, as I mentioned previously, this is a global project, folks all over the world speaking many different languages. So there's a couple different ways that we organize ourselves. One of the primary ways is through the OpenStreetMap community forum. Folks will ask questions, how do I map this specific feature? They will also propose new tags on this forum. I think this is missing in OpenStreetMap. How's this tag to fill the gap? Or talk through, for example, importing data into the map and, getting kind of community input and approval for that process. Here in the United States, we have the OpenStreetMap US Slack, which has over 8,000 folks in it who are all interested in OpenStreetMap in some way. There's different channels, for example, for mapping sidewalks specifically, or mapping in a tool called Open Historical Map. There's also channels for different states and even regions and towns in the US. You can see there's a local Alabama channel in there. Of course, there's a number of other kind of communication platforms set up by different members of the community. There's Discords and Mastodons and Signal chats and a bunch of different things. You could also message people directly through openstreetmap.org. But the Slack is one of the primary ways here in the US, and the community forum is a pretty widely recognized global tool. All right, now I want to get a little bit into OpenStreetMap US and the work that we do. You can see here, we run into this kind of confusion a lot. So we try to lay it out kind of clearly for you guys. So at the top, you've got OpenStreetMap, which is what we've been talking about this whole time. It's a data set. It's not a map. It is open data, and it is, a collectively managed resource. Nobody owns OpenStreetMap. Nobody can own OpenStreetMap. We do have the OpenStreetMap Foundation. They're based in the UK. They act as the global legal entity for OpenStreetMap, but they also manage, the servers and the hardware necessary to host OpenStreetMap. The foundation has a number of local chapters under their umbrella, of which we are one. So that's us, OpenStreetMap US. We are a local chapter of the OSMF, but we are also our own independent nonprofit here in the United States, and we have been since 2010. So as we've grown over the past 16 years now, we started with mainly organizing and hosting State of the Map US, which is our annual in-person conference, but we have widely expanded to supporting different tools that help people interact with OpenStreetMap, running different programs, events beyond State of the Map US, and other kind of community engagement activities like our working group. So I'm going to talk through some of those. But first, I want to give a brief overview of our team. So we are currently, you're on call with half of OpenStreetMap US. So we are 2 out of the 4 paid staff members. We are governed by a 5-person board of directors. They are elected by our members each year, and they're all volunteers. And then last year, we started an advisory council. which is also a volunteer position. Advisory council members are selected by our executive director, and they provide more expertise on legal matters, fundraising matters, that kind of stuff. All right, so some of the things under the OSM US umbrella, you heard about some of these. We have really started, we've become a hub for a lot of tech and tools in the OpenStreetMap ecosystem, both maintaining them and developing them ourselves primarily, but also supporting community built tools. So for example, field papers, which Jake mentioned, which is that pen and paper mapping workflow, that started as a community built tool, but when the maintainer stepped away and it was unclear, the future of the project, OpenStreetMap US took it under our wing so we could continue supporting field papers. On the kind of community managed side of things, we support a really neat project called OSM Americana, which is a map style inspired by kind of vintage paper highway maps in the United States, and they've digitally rendered every highway shield in the United States. We support them through our community projects program, so we give them a monthly stipend to support development and server costs. We also act as the fiscal sponsor for a number of projects. So for Open Historical Map, I mentioned earlier, they map everything that isn't in OpenStreetMap because it doesn't exist anymore. So they call themselves the world's most out-of-date map. They are a charter project of ours, so they can fundraise through our 501c3 status. And then on the program side of things, we will stand up different programs based on community interest, community need, but also, interesting and topical mapping problems that folks in the US are trying to address. For example, we have our Trail Stewardship Initiative, which has been running for a number of years now. And that's a collaboration between, volunteer mappers, folks in the private sector, but also, government employees who are all working to address issues of trail mapping in the United States and what happens if a trail is rendered on an app like All Trails or Gaia that Jake was mentioning, in a way that's incorrect or in a way that the people managing that land doesn't want to happen. Another example, Teach OSM is our longest running program, and it's a coalition of educators who are all sharing knowledge and working together to get OpenStreetMap into classrooms as an educational tool. We host, I believe, what is this, 10 working groups now, and they all meet monthly or bi-monthly, kind of depending on their need, online. They're always free to attend, and they inform a lot of the programs and the tools that we run. So for example, the Trails Working Group, they help inform the projects that the Trail Stewardship Initiative is working on, and the roadmap for that program. The same goes for the Education Working Group. We also have a State of the Map US program committee, and they help review all the talks submitted to our conference. So there's a wide variety of working groups for a number of different needs that we have as an organization for volunteer help, but also for members of the community to talk about things that they're interested in mapping. I have another example here. We've got our pedestrian working group. This was started 2 years ago, I believe, after one of our conferences, because folks were realizing in the United States that sidewalks were not very well represented on OpenStreetMap. Considering that in the United States we're a very car dominant culture, the highway mapping community in the US was very strong and mighty, but the folks mapping sidewalks wanted a bit more support. So we meet with folks interested in mapping pedestrian infrastructure monthly. And we also have a government working group as well. which may be of particular interest to some of the folks on this call. It's a wide variety of government agencies, from um, members of the National Park Service and different federal agencies to representatives from cities and counties across the United States. And everyone is more than welcome to the government working group. We often have presentations from folks talking about how they use OpenStreetMap data in their work. Speaking of those presentations, I'm going to hand it back to Jake to talk through a couple case studies.
Sure. Yeah, so we wanted to share a few case studies that are specifically about how government agencies at every level are using OpenStreetMap data, because it's often very clear that the private sector is using the free data that is produced by OpenStreetMap volunteers in all sorts of interesting ways, building applications, for navigation and all sorts of other purposes. But what's not as obvious sometimes is that a lot of government agencies are also using OpenStreetMap in really inventive and exciting ways, even if those agencies are themselves also producing geodata. They're augmenting their workflows with OpenStreetMap and kind of combining the two to make something even better. So if you go to the next slide, please. The first example I wanted to share really quickly is the North Carolina DOT. So they gave a presentation a few months ago at our government working group. They have this process where they're regularly taking their authoritative roads data set and comparing it against OpenStreetMap. And they do this in an automated fashion, I think, with ArcGIS. And they do this to find discrepancies where the two data sets don't agree. And the reason they do this is because they get county level roll-ups of changes that are made on the ground, like if an intersection is rebuilt, turned into a roundabout, something like that. They get data about the new road geometries from the county, but it's on an annual schedule. So by the time they get it, the changes have already been made on the ground for a long time. And their state level authoritative data set can often be really out of date, but OpenStreetMap tends to get updated much more quickly by volunteers. And so by flagging these places where their data set and OpenStreetMap disagree, it's quick for them to find places where something has changed on the ground, and they can react to that and update their data set to match it without having to wait for the data to bubble up from the counties. Next slide, please. A second example is TriMet. TriMet is the regional transit agency for the Portland, Oregon metro area. And they use OpenStreetMap data really heavily for providing their transit services to riders. So they have a website, with an app that you can use to plan a bus trip, figure out, how to get downtown, where you need to transfer. That app uses OpenStreetMap data, not just as the base map, but for the information about where bus routes and bus stops are. And not only is their user-facing app using OpenStreetMap data, but they also use OSM data for dispatch, tracking, and turn-by-turn directions in the buses and vehicles themselves. So they're really invested in OpenStreetMap and in making sure that the OpenStreetMap data in the Portland metro region is really accurate and up to date. Next slide, please. A third example is Massachusetts GIS. So the state of Massachusetts has a statewide 911 dispatch data set that's used for emergency response. And they have taken to taking their authoritative data and then augmenting it in places where it's incomplete with OpenStreetMap data to make a more comprehensive 911 dispatch data set. And in particular, they found that this is really helpful with trails. So by having more trails in their 911 dispatch data set, they can more effectively find lost hikers who call 911 for assistance. And by taking OpenStreetMap trails data and patching it into their state authoritative trails data to create their new state 911 data set, they almost double the size of the trail network data that they have. So they're patching a lot of places where the authoritative data is incomplete, but OpenStreetMap can fill in some of the gaps. Next slide, please. And then the final example that I'll share is Kendall County, Illinois. So Kendall County, their GIS office is kind of really at the cutting edge of using OpenStreetMap data. They are managing a large portion of their official data sets directly in OpenStreetMap. So rather than maintain a separate authoritative data set of building footprints or waterways or address points, they have taken to putting that data in OpenStreetMap, editing it and updating it in OpenStreetMap, and in collaboration with locals in the Kendall County region in Illinois, who can help then make updates, point out inaccuracies, improve the data if something changes on the ground. And this is kind of wild in the sense that this means that anyone can come in and access their data and edit it. But they're using tools like OSM CHA to make sure that people who are editing the authoritative data are making accurate edits, and that they can detect and revert things that are inaccurate. So they're really all in, and we're told that every employee at Kendall GIS has an OSM account and goes through OSM mapping training as part of their employee onboarding, which I think is really cool. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'll close out just with how you can learn more if you want to get involved, if you want to connect with people in the OpenStreetMap community and learn more about the project. So we host a bunch of events throughout the year. In the center, Mapping USA, that's our annual virtual conference, and it just happened in January. And all of the talks are recorded, and they're all up on YouTube and on our website now. So if you want to watch a whole bunch of lightning talks, they're like 5 and 10 minutes long about different topics in OpenStreetMap, you can find that on our website or on our YouTube channel. We also have, if you go to the next slide, actually, we have an in-person conference coming up. Our annual in-person conference is called State of the Map US. And this year it's going to be in Madison, Wisconsin, June 11th through 13th. The tickets are on sale now, and the program is going to be announced really soon. And that's a great way that's like a big way that our community of mappers and data users come together every year and learn from each other and share. And so I hope you'll consider coming out. And then we also have Mappy hours every couple of months. These are informal evening like talks or group chats about virtual hangouts about topics that are interesting to OpenStreetMap community members. And the one that's coming up next is on March 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And it's about our sister project, Open Historical Map, which is the map that Alyssa mentioned earlier of mapping, a collaborative effort to build a map of the way the world was throughout history. Next slide, please. And then we have lots of self-organized local meetups and kind of community events. And there's definitely already an active community in Alabama. So if you're interested in helping grow the OpenStreetMap community in your area, one of the best things that you can do is try and connect with other people online through our OSM US Slack. There's a local Alabama channel, for example. There's also an OpenStreetMap Deep South Discord. So you can try and find other people who are in your local area who might be interested in meeting up in person for, to do a mapping party or just, share with each other what they're doing with OpenStreetMap and learn together. Next slide, please. And then finally, if you want to stay connected with OpenStreetMap US, you can sign up we have a email newsletter that you can sign up for on our website, openstreetmap.us. You can join our community Slack group. You can go to slack.openstreetmap.us and fill out a form, and it'll send you an email invitation to the chat group. We're on Instagram and LinkedIn at OpenStreetMap US. And if you have questions about anything that we presented about today, you can email Alyssa or I directly. Please feel free to reach out. I think there's one more slide. And then finally, if you're interested in becoming a member, our 501c3 is a membership-driven organization, so we're funded by memberships from individuals and organizations. You can learn more about membership on our website. For individuals, membership is $20 a year, and it lets you vote in our board elections and has some other perks and helps support the work we do. And then also, if you're interested in joining one of our working groups, like the government working group, trails working group, pedestrian working group, any of the others that we mentioned today, there's information about how to do that on our website as well, and information about when those working groups meet. And I think that is all we have for you today, but we have a few minutes left, so we're happy to take some questions. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think One of my favorite ways to get started is to go to openstreetmap.org and click edit. Zoom in on somewhere that you're familiar with, like your neighborhood or your hometown or something. And then if you click the edit button, the first time the editor launches, it will show you a walkthrough. And I think the walkthrough is a really good explanation of how to use the tool and the basics of how it works. And I will also say that OpenStreetMap is a pretty safe environment to try things out in. You're not gonna break anything just by launching the editor. You have to click a save button and type in a description and click a confirm button before anything actually goes live on the map. So feel free to click the edit button and just fire up the editor and drag stuff around and see how it works. And you can always just close your browser tab and it'll that'll prevent anything from actually being uploaded.
Yeah, there's a ton of YouTube tutorials out there. The humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, they host a bunch of resources and kind of click-through learning guides on their website as well. So there's a bunch of stuff out there to help you get started. And of course, the forum, the Slack are great places to ask questions if you run into anything that confuses you. Ooh, okay. So now that my day job is OpenStreetMap, I admit I am not as active of an editor as I would like to be. But one of the things I have enjoyed editing recently, there's a project run by our board president, actually, and community member called Mascot Map, where he is creating a map of all the mascots, high school mascots in the United States. And I believe it's a map roulette task where you could go and it cycles you through different high schools. You could add um, their mascot to the map. So I've been contributing to that one. My favorite edit so far is there's a high school out in West Virginia, in Polka, West Virginia, and their mascot is the dots. So they are the polka dots, and I really enjoyed adding that to the map.
That's great. For me, I really enjoy mapping trails and stuff out in the wilderness. I got involved with OpenStreetMap because I live in Seattle, Washington, and I do a lot of hiking in the mountains here. And the app that I was using said, copyright OpenStreetMap in the corner, and I thought, oh, what does that mean? And I, went and learned about where the data comes from, and I got involved in the trails working group. And so whenever I'm out hiking, I like to record a GPS track, and then when I come home, I make sure that the trail is properly aligned in OpenStreetMap. Any other questions?
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having us. Oh, I
Yeah,
do see
it's
a
my
raise
pleasure.
hand.
Hey,
Well, ditto
yeah.
that, and thank.
Oh, I was going to ask a quick question if possible. I was
Go ahead,
wondering,
Jacob.
do you ever run into issues where folks map something and then someone else doesn't want it mapped? And how do you go about resolving that?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. There are sometimes disputes about how things should be represented in OpenStreetMap or whether things should be shown at all in OpenStreetMap. We try to have pretty clear kind of the wiki is a good source, not just for the technical nitty gritty of how, what does a specific tag mean, but the wiki also has lots of high level guidance about what is and isn't suitable for OpenStreetMap. So it has a lot of thoughts about what is and isn't ethical to map, like mapping things that are on private property or in people's private homes, or mapping things that might put people in danger. There's also a lot of thoughts on the wiki about what is factual versus what is opinion based. OpenStreetMap tries to be a data set of facts about the world. So things that we include in the data are supposed to be verifiable, that someone else who goes to the same location and looks at the same building would say yeah, that's true, that, that fact that's in OpenStreetMap, I can confirm it, and that they wouldn't like arrive at an opposite opinion looking at the same thing. So that tends to help like set a baseline for resolving disputes, but there are certainly still cases where people like have different opinions about what's important or what should be in the map. And we try to work it out with discussion. There's often heated debates on the forums about whether something should be mapped or what the best way to represent something is. Usually those are resolved amicably, but in extreme cases, there's also a data working group that's kind of a court of arbiters of decisions about how to resolve serious disputes. Sometimes like when there's like an international border dispute during a conflict or something, and there are people on both sides with very strong opinions about how the map should look, the data working group will get involved.
I see there's a question in the chat. The need for more sidewalk data was mentioned. What else is out there that you want people to map? That's a great question. I mean, when it comes to what we want people to map, being OpenStreetMap US, we just want folks to get involved with the map in whatever way that they think is interesting and engaging and empowering to them. I will say some of the trends we've noticed, and we try to see what's out there in the US community and see what topics are really interesting people. Mentioned sidewalks, trails. Another one is accessibility data. For example, a lot of the building footprints are mapped, but whether or not they're wheelchair accessible, that's a different story. So adding that metadata about accessibility or other information is something a lot of folks are kind of realizing is a gap in OpenStreetMap data in the US specifically, and they're trying to fill.
Yeah, I'm reading that now. Can very small scale items like historic land development plats be effectively displayed as overlays in OSM? I'm not sure I know exactly what the answer to that question is, but certainly like OpenStreetMap can be recombined with other data. So if you have like historical base maps that you want to look at, and you want an overlay of what the world looks like today on top of that, or if you want to combine OpenStreetMap is all vector data, but if you want to combine it with a raster data set like land cover or a hillshade, part of the power of it being open data is that you can take the OpenStreetMap data and produce whatever kind of map you want with it, including mixing OpenStreetMap data and non-OpenStreetMap data together. So you can build you could in something like ArcGIS or in a web map platform, you could build a map that displays all sorts of things overlaid on top of OpenStreetMap. But whether or not data like belongs in the OpenStreetMap project itself is kind of a separate question. OpenStreetMap is more scoped on things that are verifiable on the ground, facts about the physical world as it exists today. And OpenStreetMap is also not always, certainly I would say not survey grade data. Most of the time, the geometries that are in OpenStreetMap are things that were drawn by volunteers based on satellite imagery. So usually the satellite imagery is 10 centimeter or 50 centimeter, or it's satellite or often aerial imagery. So the spatial resolution is pretty good, but it wouldn't be survey grade. And so trying to determine like where private property ends and the city right of way begins or something is out of scope for OpenStreetMap. Cool. Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to say again, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure to present to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please feel free to reach out to us, get involved in the OpenStreetMap US community. and stay in touch.
Thank you both very much.